Good morning and welcome to the Citizen Body Podcast, or as we call it, the Bodycast. I am your host, Susanne Hill, and today with me, I have Tim Dooner. And just to give you guys a little bit of a background, so you're either listening or watching the Citizen Bodycast, and we are the podcast that talks about the things that unite us and not what divides us. How do we come together as humans to coexist in a world that can be kind of confusing sometimes? And how are we going to make a difference? How can we think big and act small? Because that's where we really seem to make our impact. So you can get your content on the citizenbody.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletter where you can get a weekly sampling of some treats such as a podcast, the comic, a lesson, an article, or a story that our co-founder, John Katrina, will provide that content for us each week. And full disclosure, Tim is Pastor Tim. He is the pastor at the church that I attend. So again, full disclosure, I thought Tim would be a great guest for us to have today because a lot of what we talk about is resiliency. And we've been talking lately about bringing back things in a post-COVID world. So COVID happened about 14, 15 months ago, I guess it's been, that we've been kind of living in this weird isolation. And before we dive into that piece of it, Tim, let's talk about you for a minute. So welcome to the podcast, to the Bodycast, and tell us a bit about where you come from in ministry. What got you started? What attracted you to that as your career?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and being able to share my story in a way that I hope is helpful to others. I'm a local guy. I grew up outside of Malvern, grew up in Presbyterian church in Paoli that was really community oriented. And it was a fantastic foundation upon which to build a worldview. And studied engineering in college, but really felt compelled to be a part of this, this social organization that I had been a part of my whole life called the church. And so I went back to school for ministry, served as an assistant in Malvern for a few years. I went and served a church up in Emmaus in the Lehigh Valley for several years, and now have been almost 5 years serving in King of Prussia.
So right now we're in May of 2021 is the time frame that we're recording this podcast. Mm-hmm. And so you've been with us about 5 years. And what made you come from Emmaus? What made you want to come back here? Was it, obviously family in the area, but was there anything else that drew you back to the area?
Yeah, it was really two things. The first, like you said, being family, to get our kids closer to grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins was important to us. Another thing is cultural fitness. I've come to understand that it's really important for leaders in the church to have a cultural compatibility with their congregation. And Emmaus isn't that far from where I grew up, but the Lehigh Valley is just different enough culturally that I felt like if I really wanted to have the biggest impact, I needed to be back in a culture that was more of a holistic fit for me. And then Valley Forge in particular seemed to be in a place where they were ripe for some new visions. It's a church that has a storied history, has done a lot of good stuff in the community, but it reached a point where it's really at a crossroads. And it felt like rather than stepping into a spot where I would be asked to maintain a status quo, that I would have the opportunity to step into a context where with some new vision and surrounding myself with some other leaders who wanted to look out and see the community in a different way, that there might be a better chance here to do something really meaningful for the community than somewhere else where I was spending more of my time in maintenance mode rather than in community mode. So it all kind of lined up as making a whole lot of sense for me coming here.
Yeah, and very fair to say. So for those of our listeners or viewers who are not local, we are just about 20 to 25 minutes outside of Philadelphia in the northern western suburbs. So it's King of Prussia is a pretty big town You may know us for being the second largest mall in the United States, but we're right next to Valley Forge Park, so hence the name Valley Forge Presbyterian Church. And again, speaking to the storied history, I think the church itself was founded in 1955. And I remember when my parents came to the area, it was in the late 60s, and they came because job opportunities at the time, what is currently Lockheed Martin, was at the time General Electric. And that's what really kind of started to settle a lot of the community and drew people out from the city into the suburbs, my parents included. And that was the opportunity that brought people here. So now fast forward to today, and a lot of the people who were drawn to that community, I would say probably now are starting to exit the community, kind of looking for, in their retirement years, or if not, a little bit beyond that, if it's fair to say.
Yeah.
And the same, I think, kind of goes along with the church, as that, like, it's really been, I think it's fair to say, it's been an aging congregation. Is that what you found when you first got here?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of that explosive growth that you talked about in the 50s and 60s, King of Prussia went from farmlands to suburbia in 10 years. And so really this church has been aging since the 60s, because there was this influx of professionals, and the church exploded along with King of Prussia. And then ever since, hitting that peak has just been aging. And the town itself, all the neighborhoods that were those first original owners are all turning over. There are more transplants coming in to work with, the the bazillions of companies and corporations that have found a home in King of Prussia now. And so the neighborhoods are changing, not just from, original residents to new folks that look and think and have similar stories, but are coming from a wide range of places all over the world to come work in King of Prussia. And so, it's in a really neat time as a municipality of diversification. And while that certainly brings its challenges to the established community, it also brings a lot of gifts and new perspectives and new opportunities to be a binding force in the community that looks at that diversity as something to be nurtured and embraced rather than something to be resisted.
Yeah. So how do you nurture and embrace that? So what kind of, what have you found that's been a challenge so far since you came to this area and then you took on those responsibilities to try to revive this church?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the church is people. And so it's going to face all those same challenges that every corporation and every family and every individual is going to face. And that's, a real discomfort with things changing. Change certainly is constant. And yet it's something that we have evolved as a species to resist deeply in ways that we don't even fully understand. And so, the first challenge of this church and any church that I could serve is moving beyond, dealing with, naming, and then moving beyond that resistance to change, especially, to be really contextual about this particular church, especially because it grew so quickly in the 50s and 60s. Boy, they just solidified in their, norms and expectations of what this community of faith was. And, a lot of that original generation of church members are still around. And so, we haven't had generational change in the church that disrupts the status quo and breaks patterns open so that there's room for new things. And so the challenge on our end has been being able to see a different way of being this particular church. And so there's sort of the fear and the resistance among the membership to overcome, but then it's also a challenge to nurture new habits and attitudes toward the community so that, we are better equipped to serve our community. the church of the 50s and 60s everywhere was really successful at, at what I understand as to be an attractional model of being the church, where you put up your sign, you used to make sure you had to have a phone book, make sure that you had good coffee ready, make sure you're ready to put on a good show, according to your traditions and rhythms. Not everybody thinks the Presbyterian show is a good show, but
I've heard us referred to as the frozen chosen.
Yeah, right. Right. So put on a good show, but not too much enthusiasm. And then open the doors and wait for people to come. And use your programs and use your minister and use your coffee. Use whatever you can to attract people to come into the building, and then that's where you do your work. But
really seemed it worked in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Do you think that model still works today?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of cultural pressure and societal expectation that, a good American has some sort of church or faith community membership on their resume. And I would argue it's the exact opposite now, that for good reason, for good reasons, as well as for some that are misunderstood, there's a lot of cynicism toward the church as an institution. And so, whereas before, I was good friends in Emmaus, where I used to serve, with a retired minister in his 80s. And, he served the church in the 50s and 60s. And he would say, Tim, it was so easy. Like, we learned what we needed to learn in seminary, and we'd open the doors and people just came. And we didn't really have to try. They just came. But now it's the exact opposite. The church is in a place where it's lost a lot of trust in the larger community. And so now it's really hard to overcome that challenge of cynicism and a lack of trust, and to get people to engage the ideas of what you're trying to do as an organization in the world. And some churches have they've aged and dwindled so much that so much of their attention, out of necessity, has had to turn inward. For there's so many good things that happen to them as part of that church. They just want to sustain that, and so everything they do is about trying to keep themselves alive, such that in so many ways we've been distracted from and lost sight of what we're supposed to be, or what we understand we are at our core, which is this social construct of building communities of welcome, hospitality, unity, inclusion, that counteract the social forces that want to divide and label and judge. But it's been a human institution, and so in a lot of ways we've failed miserably at maintaining that core of what the church was always supposed to be, and we became the opposite. We added to those social forces of exclusion and judgment and division. So for us now, we're in a place where, the social pressure isn't pushing people in the door anymore, and we're having to retrain ourselves as a church about how to approach the community, not from these sort of dogmatic or judgmental places, and not from purely academic place, but how do we get outside of ourselves to really hands-on ways love our neighbor, and be willing to go out and be the one that initiates engaging our community, rather than just sitting back and waiting for people to come to us.
Yeah. And so far we've talked about the church, the church in general, and I think it definitely applies to our church in particular as well. We're really kind of focusing on it more almost like a business today, and we will definitely talk about God, and we'll bring God into this a bit, but you need to sustain this as a business as well, because otherwise a church folds up and goes. And yeah. So let's kind of fast forward a little bit into COVID. So COVID changed the way, you're a minister, you have a couple of years under your belt at a church that definitely needs some reviving. And then COVID comes and just shuts you down. What did you do?
Oh, it was nuts. I scratched my head a lot at first, wondering what the heck we're going to do. Because so many of the established patterns and rhythms, so much of the status quo was contingent upon being able to gather in person in the same building. And
Yeah.
so, we did what folks in the corporate world, folks in the educational world did, is we had to figure out on the fly how to pivot to more of a virtual mode of being.
Yeah.
And so, there were a flurry of conversations in all the different layers of the church world when the pandemic first hit about the best way to make that shift into the virtual world. And the two options seem to be, do we do a live stream that people can just kind of sit back and watch, either live, or it's a recording that they watch later, or do we try and take the virtual end of things, where it's more interactive in the moment? And so for us, because we are a smaller community and we thought we could do it, we chose to go with Zoom, and to nurture intentional interaction rather than the live stream where I and others would say or sing a bunch of stuff, and then you could sit back and watch it or not watch it, depending on how you were compelled or how your time allowed. And I have to admit that part of that for me was a philosophical choice, and not just a logistical one. I'm weary of church becoming an event, or a show, that I'm weary where it feels like there's a performer and an audience, because we're supposed, we're a community of people that kind of think and reflect on these things together, and then encourage each other to go out into the world and be a certain kind of people. And so Zoom fit us really well. It wasn't perfect because, again, aging church, there were some of our older members in particular that just weren't comfortable or able to engage via Zoom. And so we tried our best to kind of hang on to them during the pandemic season. But those of us that were able to shift and adapt to Zoom, it really was for us the silver lining of the pandemic, because it put us in much more closely connected face-to-face relationships, and it also enabled us to shift away from just the kind of the standard observer audience kind of experience in the pews of our building to more of this interactive thing where I really do think that that most of us participating in Zoom were more reflective. We're more deeply challenged by these ideas about who we are. And we got so much more closely connected in friendship and in trust of one another because of Zoom. But that took intentionality. We made that decision. This is what we're going to do, and for however long this goes, not knowing, God, nobody knew it was going to be like 15 months that we had to do this. But then
I know for me, I was a little late to the party. I didn't even realize for several months that we were doing it. I was just like, oh, church is closed. And I'm like, all right, there's no church. And then I found out that we were on Zoom, and I was, what? And then I started participating, and I noticed a lot of difference where, there's like the sign of peace where you might shake hands with the people. And in our church, generally pre-COVID, people would walk around and shake your hands, and you didn't just shake hands with the people that were around your pew. Most people kind of walked around the sanctuary for a little bit, and we, spoke and socialized for about 5 minutes or so, and then sit back down and back to the observee, dynamic that tends to be church.
Sure.
But I noticed with Zoom, I might say hi or see some people that I don't normally get to say hi to or see, because usually I was one of the people who kind of stuck to my little pod and didn't walk all the way around. I let the other folks do the walking, and I'd still interact with everybody. So it's kind of been interesting to see the shift. I've noticed it seems that people talk a little bit more, they share a little bit more, you learn more about people in their lives, and
Yeah.
You would think it'd be the opposite, but we really got to know each other maybe just a little bit better. Maybe it's just on the surface, and maybe it's just the little things and like, hey, please pray for me. And they, tell you a little, like a tidbit of their lives or something important that's going on around them. And there was a lot more of a community of sharing that's really
Yeah.
developed out of Zoom.
Yeah, definitely. I know you're the focus of this work that you're doing through this podcast is how to nurture, real honest to goodness unity. And, unity demands trust, and it demands a knowledge of each other's context and life experiences. And it demands a knowledge of, what needs to happen in order to overcome the divisions that are there. And so, we did a lot of good work that way. But again, that's in-house. And so,
Yes.
I think we were really careful, or at least I tried to be, to put us in a place during the pandemic season where we were really thinking and reflecting on how, we can go out from this place of us knowing what it means to be a more united people out into the community and be an intentional force for that. I think that, this pandemic season, we definitely took a step in that direction, which has been awesome to see. And there have been other things, in our in and around us as a community, as the church, that have helped to kind of challenge those preconceptions about who we are and to pull our focus out beyond ourselves and into the community too. There's a the Upper Marion area community cupboard that is nested in our building here in the suburbs, that grew in its operations fourfold once the pandemic hit. We went from helping 40 households who were food insufficient on a weekly basis to 150, 160 households within a couple of months. And so that explosion was eye-opening to a lot of people who, assume that the suburbs, aren't a place where there's hunger. So we're able to do some good education with our congregation about the reality of food insufficiency in what's understood to be a wealthy or moderately wealthy suburban community. We were able to show these pictures of our hall, which used to be for, spaghetti dinners.
I know. I was just going to describe. For those who aren't familiar, how many would you say are sanctuary seats?
Oh, sanctuary.
If you wanted to have a packed house, how many people would be?
Yeah, probably like 250.
Yeah. So it's I'd say a mid-sized church is fair to say when we talk about the physical building itself. And it's a big triangle that sits on a hill.
Yeah, it's huge A-frame. Yeah.
Yeah, and you go down a flight of stairs on either side at the base of the sanctuary, and then you are in an auditorium where, like you said, it was for spaghetti dinners. There's a stage on the front. Might be where like you'd have the kids. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was a deacon in the church, and we used to take the folks from Norristown State Hospital. We had a church bus. And we would take people who from the state hospital were okay to travel in the community. We'd pick them up on the bus. Maybe we took them out for ice cream. We'd bring them back to the church and do bingo in that basement. In the back of the basement. It's not really a basement because it is above ground, but it is down from that main area. Right. So that's when I say it sits on a hill when you're down in that lower part of the auditorium. In the back, there is a very big kitchen. And like you said, spaghetti dinners, you could cook for a ton of people and store a lot of food in this kitchen area of the church, in this big empty auditorium where the tables that get set up. You could watch something on the stage. And now I saw a picture of it. I forget what, I think it was online. And it looks completely different. When did you start doing the community cupboard? So
the community cupboard started in the summer of 2018, and it was like a refrigerator and a couple of shelves in the kitchen, and now it's like it
looks like a grocery store almost.
Yeah, it kept creeping out, and we've got more and more shelves and more storage capacity. We now have a walk-in unit outside the building. It really took over. And that was a hard conversation at first with some of the church leaders, do we feel like it's ours to do to commit space in this kitchen for something other than us? Because there were so many good memories there of those dinners and of those, events hosting the folks from Norristown. It was tough to let go of some of the kitchen equipment and say, we're going to use this for food storage. But we had those hard conversations about, our goals in the community, as well as those hard conversations about how, the potluck isn't really a thing anymore. The times they are a changing, and like that's just not something that's going to be a big deal anymore. And so, it's a much more efficient and faithful, effective use of our space to do this. And it tells the community something about who we are and what's important to us. That, we're saying that we aren't just interested in ourselves. We're interested in our neighbors. And yeah, so now it's not just that kitchen, it's the entire, it's like 5,000 or 6,000 square feet now that are just filled to the brim with these tables overflowing with food that's getting donated by all these different corporations and households from the community. And then we pack it and turn it around and out it goes. And that's been, that's been a great embodiment of this shift that we're talking about in our own life as a community, and being a people who don't just talk about the idea of unity in the neighborhood, but actually use something like food to build bridges, to build and nurture new relationships, so that it's not just about food, but it's about community. And one of the days I celebrate most as I think about the community cupboard is the first time that one of the patrons who came for food also brought a gift to share with those of us who were working there. And it was the most amazing baklava that she had made, because she had developed such a rapport and a relationship with some of us that she wanted to express that friendship and that connection by giving us something. And more of those have happened throughout the years as we've been, intentionally training our volunteers to not just be interested in food, but be interested in people. We're helping to connect the people of our community in these relationships. And until we find various ways to do that, we can talk about, unity and community till the end of the day, but they're just ideas until you find mechanisms for putting people together in relationships. And, I think that I want to celebrate with the church that we're doing that not by our programs or what I have to say on a Sunday morning, but we're doing that by this really good work. That's a really positive expression of love for our neighborhood.
Yeah, it is. And just to remind you guys that you are listening to and or watching the Citizen Body Cast. We've got Tim Dooner with us today. And remember, with the Citizen Body Cast, if you go on to thecitizenbody.com, if you like the content that we're bringing you, remember to click the little red button that says donate. And, a lot of times I always think about Marines saying, all gave some and some gave all. And we're kind of looking more at the all gave some because we're really looking at building a community and, being able to share with each other in a spirit of unity. And so, Tim, how many would you say that the community cupboard serves?
So at its peak, in the heat of the pandemic, before there was some relief to the families through stimulus and SNAP benefits and that sort of thing, we were at our busiest, serving 160 households a week, and that was, we estimate, somewhere between 500 to 600 people.
Wow.
Yeah. We help. We've helped a lot of seniors on fixed income, and then a lot of single parent families, and then a lot of families where they're working 2, 3, 4 jobs, and it's just not adding up to enough. And so if we can help to alleviate that pressure for them by helping with the groceries, then that means that they have more resources to commit to, their health care or their rent or their other expenses. So and that's just within the bounds of our local school district. which again, someone coming in, looking in from the outside is going to assume is, a relatively wealthy area, and that hunger is something that some other town deals with.
Yeah.
And that's been a conversation wherever I've served, whether it was here in Emmaus or over in Malvern Fraser area. There's still these assumptions that I think come from generations previous, that in the suburbs, this is like sort of an established community of those who are well-to-do. And that was once true, I think, in many ways, but it's not true anymore. We see, really wonderful people working professionally, who just can't make ends meet with how much things like education and healthcare and even food now is getting really expensive. So it's we're trying to educate the larger community about how some of these things in our society have changed over the last several decades that have caused a rise in food insecurity among even traditionally wealthy communities. And it's been really positive to see how when we're able to kind of pull the veil down and debunk these myths about the suburbs, when there is a deeper awareness of what's really going on, there's been an amazing outpouring of compassion and generosity from both the corporate community in and around us here in the suburbs, and then the local residents have been really, really kind and generous with food and with financial donations to the cupboard, so that they can do their part to help lift up the struggling among us.
Yeah. Do you have anything, where do you get your fresh vegetables from? Or do you not get to, do we have a garden or anything there?
So we have a small piece of our local community garden where we do some growing, and we've asked everyone that has a plot in our community to garden to consider donating toward us. And that every year, every growing season, that gets a little more known and it's a little more fruitful. But for the most part, our fresh stuff comes from an organization called Phil Abundance, or we order it through some wholesale distributors, because we really have wanted to make sure that we're offering some good, healthy stuff too, as well as all the good, really carby, non-perishables that people love. So, and also, I do have to say that there's been a program at the national level called Farmers to Families that has provided us with a lot of really good, fresh stuff to share with our families too.
Okay. So anybody who would want to donate to the cupboard, how would they do that?
Oh gosh, well, thanks for asking.
Let's get a plug in here.
Yeah, absolutely. umacc.org, Upper Marion Area Community Cupboard, and folks can give online through a number of, digital formats. We would love to have the support of anybody who wants to share with an organization that's doing really good and compassionate work.
Yeah, good deal.
Yeah.
And now let's kind of we'll backtrack again back into the beginning of COVID. When you really didn't have a platform to speak from. You became a YouTube star, I think, for a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. I did.
You were posting,
I did try that
once a week. Yeah. Once a week, you were posting something called Wilderness Reflections.
Yeah, totally. So that the wilderness is it's a good scriptural metaphor for it's a good way to frame for the church what was happening, because the wilderness in the Hebrew and the Greek scriptures was this place where, people were dislocated from normalcy and went into the wilderness. And the wilderness became that place where you were able to reflect on what life had been, consider what you wanted it to be, and then to prepare yourself to enter into a new normal. And so that was exactly what we were entering into, when COVID first hit. The chance to say, all right, this is dislocation is not fun. It's gonna challenge us, and it's going to be hard. But there is a unique opportunity in the wilderness to get a much clearer understanding of who we are and who we want to be. And so, I've kept up, not weekly, all throughout these months, I've kept up this train of thought about more deeply understanding ourselves while we are in the wilderness, as we're not distracted by the daily grind, but we had more time and headspace to think and reflect. How can that help us to emerge from this time in a better place, or with healthier expectations that shape our future in a more effective or a more faithful way. And so really the heartbeat of those reflections was understanding this dynamic of the physicality that we've all evolved with, that predisposes us to things like antagonism and fighting, predisposes us to make negative assumptions about others, and predisposes us to tribalism, and how those have materialized in our lives together, not just as a church, but just as people in general in community. And how that—
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
because this
please.
is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is the concept of tribalism.
Yeah, it's
and
huge.
Yeah, it's a word that's used a lot, and I've kind of been struggling with trying to understand. Can you kind of break it down for me a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, it's that propensity we have to locate ourselves among others who look, think, speak like us, because at a deep physical, visceral level, we trust that that is the place that's most safe. Okay. And we also then, if we encounter someone who looks, thinks, speaks differently, there's something deep and visceral within us that assumes that they are other. And so, this is our tribe that looks, thinks, speaks all the same, and they are their tribe because they're different in these ways. And I am afraid of them, and they're other. And so I'm going to do everything I can to maintain the safety and the integrity of my tribe, that they're going to become the most important for me. And
I think with tribalism, it was a lot about, like, when we kind of go back to ancient times, tribalism to me has kind of been more about survival as well. Like when I first learned the word tribe, you were talking about African tribes or Native American tribes. And I've always thought of them as somebody that you have something in common with, that, you've been born in the same place, you have the same ancestors. And to me, that's kind of been what tribe means. And then you hear about like warring tribes.
Yeah.
But now we kind of like the word tribe is almost kind of like Taylor Swift had her glam squad and her friends are her squad. And now people kind of refer to their closer acquaintances or their trusted folks as their tribe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's different.
Yeah. Well, it is. It is. But the physical impulse is ancient, right?
Yeah.
So, for millions of years, humanity lived in tribes, like you said, primarily for their own protection.
Yeah.
And so, we evolved as a species to think that way. It kept humanity alive. But now in the modern and now in the postmodern world, where we are more of a global citizenship than we are a tribal society.
Yeah. So think citizen body. This is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. We have millions of years of evolution that we're now fighting against. So if we say that unity is our goal, we have to understand that we evolved as human beings and we all have this physical impulse toward tribalism. We all have evolved to assume negatively about people who we understand to be different than us. We have all evolved to prepare ourselves to fight or run away from those who are different. And that is a physical thing. It's not a character flaw, because we have all evolved with it. It's just a part of our DNA. But if we can name that and understand it, then we can move beyond those impulses. And so, that's been the thrust of this whole wilderness series, is naming things like racism and how, these physical triggers within us help to fuel things like racism. And so we can become more aware of how these physical tendencies are shaping our interaction with one another, and then we can choose a different way of relating to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about with Citizen Body is the alien perspective, which is kind of pulling back. Like, I always think when I'm watching, a local news show and they're showing me something that's happening in a certain neighborhood, they take a big global view of the map and then they drop down right into that little city. And then I think of alien perspective as that little, I know, podcasting from home, it's fun. And when we take that little, camera and take that small view, and then we pull back, and now we're just not looking at, the state of Pennsylvania, the state of New York, or the entire United States. We're looking at it from outside the earth. I always say when the, when the aliens land, they're going to be shocked to see us picking up after the dogs. They're going to think the dogs are the leader. I think there's several comics about that too. But what is an like alien perspective when you pull back and you see like all of these, different warring tribes, and I'm right and you're right, and what are we really fighting over, and really kind of being able to take that, pull back, and use that alien perspective to learn about others.
Yeah, that's it. And we need to do that as a people to move beyond, to move into this more modern era where we're all connected. Absolutely, because it's at, in the church world, the focus is on dogmatism and how that's been sort of this tribal force that divided a thing that's supposed to be this global movement toward peace on earth, that divided it into like tens of thousands of different clubs that exclude people when they believe the wrong things. That's the church being affected negatively by these physical forces that we have. And if we can take that alien view, we can say, oh, wait a minute, that's not what this is supposed to be about. What this is supposed to be is this global social construct that's an alternative to that, that where you can transcend these impulses that you have to judge and divide and differentiate yourself from others, and you can understand your belonging. And then in the world around us, I mean, how many, there's fighting between religions and sects of religions, there's warring between nations and tribes, and so much of that is because there's nothing that's challenging these physical predispositions. And so, I've tried to make the argument in this series that that's what it means to be spiritual. That when you allow something within that place within you, whether you talk about that as being in your mind or in your heart or in your spirit, however everybody understands that within themselves, that place where there's a voice that tells you what to do and how to think. If we can locate a different voice in that place that tells us what's real and good and true, other than just our body telling us to be afraid and weary of others, then that's how we move beyond our this place where we're stuck in being purely physical and reactionary, animalistic in ways. You mentioned picking up after the dogs. Like, I love my dog, but he can't do that. He's just purely instinctual. And if he sees the squirrel, he's going to chase it. If he sees a hot dog that's unguarded, he's going to eat it. Like, he can't understand his physical impulses and then choose to not live by them. But humanity can. And to me, that's what spirituality does. Whatever package you want to put it in or not put it in, whether it's religious or it's not, I think all of the major world religions have this spiritual core that we're all after the same thing, which is transcending these flags that the body sends up that cause nothing but division and destruction, and seeing people differently for who they really are, and seeing a sense of belonging that allows the tribes to be together, not in complete homogeneity, but in peace amidst their beautiful differences.